Okay, got the red smoke.
Gun runs north and south, west of the smoke, west of the smoke.
Okay, copy. West of the smoke. I'm looking at danger close now.
Come on with it, baby. Give it to me. I need it. You're cleared hot.
Copy, cleared hot.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, let's begin. Cleared Hot, Tactical Assholes, episode or volume number 1, with the movie that began, or the movie where it began for me, and probably many, many other young men like me, Navy SEALs. Now, before I get into this, let's talk about what this episode is and what it's not. First off, it's not intended to be some derogatory dissection of this movie. What it really is a comical look, and in my mind, I view this movie as a comedy. So this is more of a compare and contrast between Hollywood magic and the realities of life. And the whole idea between Tactical Assholes, the whole idea for Tactical Assholes started when I was sitting down talking with Joe, and he asked me my thoughts on war movies and whether or not I enjoy watching them. And I said, no, I don't, because I lose my mind because of their tactical inaccuracies, of which there are many in most movies that involve at least gunplay. So that's where it started. And then as I dug into it a little bit deeper, I realized that nobody's really doing much of a review of those movies from a tactical perspective. And also, it'd be incredibly easy to post pictures at a daily level of people who are creating a terrible example of safety, tactics, proficiency, competency, fill in the blank when it comes to those weapons themselves. So that's kind of where it all started. So this episode, though, if you take yourself a little bit too seriously, or you think that everything that everybody says, or in this instance, everything that I say is dead serious, you might not enjoy it as much because I'm just going to have a good time. There's no negativity behind what I say. I actually enjoy this movie. I've probably watched this thing 100 times. Like I said, it began a journey for me, well, not the movie itself, but some of the books I read as well. So it's definitely a part of my life, and I recently went back and watched it for the first time in probably decades, and I was dying laughing, and that's why I thought it was a comedy. So we're going to sit down, and my plan is to play some scenes on my laptop, and actually this is kicking my ass because my plan was to basically import the movie in and be able to show scenes, talk about them, and then put them up in this YouTube video. And on that note, this particular episode, it might be better if you consume it via YouTube instead of an audio format only. You'll probably be able to hear some of the things, but obviously you won't be able to see them. And what I am going to be able to do is at least put up screen grabs of what I'm talking about so I can highlight the difference between real life and the Hollywood magic. And maybe this isn't one to listen to with your kids in the car. If you're the kind of person who listens to this when you're dropping the kids off, the subject matter we're going to be covering is purely inaccuracies, so there might not be too much for them to gain. Just food for thought. So let's get into this. Let's begin with our first review, of which I'm going to try to at least do a volume of Tactical Assholes once per month. And until I run out of SEAL movies, that's what I'm going to stick with. But if you have suggestions for movies that you'd like to see, then by all means, please reach out to me because I'd like to do it. And I'd like to put together a panel of people that can join me to dissect for accuracy. So, I have my uniform on, my Tactical Asshole uniform, a lovely t-shirt. It's HK 816 with its beautiful optic facing the wrong direction, the magazine in backwards. It's a 30-round extended magazine clip. This is the full semi-auto version of the rifle. The foregrip is on backwards with the lovely Tactical Asshole. I'd say it's embroidery, but it's printing on the foregrip. So if you want to join me for our next episode of Tactical Assholes in your uniform, which I think would be pretty fancy, go to clearedhotpodcast.com, click on the shop tab, and then you're going to find it. So let's begin with the plot summary of the movie. And it says, and you find this on the internet, this movie was created in 1990 in the thriller/action genre, and it received 5.5 out of 10 stars. How dare these movie raters? It's at least a 9 out of 10 in my opinion. If you change thriller and action and move that into comedy. It's an hour and 53 minutes, which is pretty amazing in and of itself. And the synopsis reads, Navy Special Operations Forces go to the Middle East to free a helicopter crew taken captive by terrorist Ben Shahid. After learning that Shahid has killed a hostage and acquired missiles on the black market, specifically Stinger missiles, Lieutenant James Curran, who is played by Michael Bain. Now, on a totally unrelated note to this movie, this guy has played a SEAL in at least 4 movies that I know of. So he's damn near an honorary SEAL. I think he should be at least given a trident and a certificate that could get him into trouble in a bar. But I like this guy. I like the fact that for whatever reason he falls into the SEAL character, and he does a pretty good job. He owns it. So we have him, Lieutenant James Curran. He's the OIC, or Officer in Charge, supposedly the guy making the decisions on the ground. A lieutenant is an O3, which is very early. If you join the Navy, you're going to get a mandatory promotion to O3 for 2 years. You're going to be an O1. For 2 years, you're going to be an O2, and then on that 4-year anniversary, you're going to get flipped over to an O3. Working with him, though, is Lieutenant Dale Hawkins, Charlie Sheen. And they consult with a reporter who is an expert on Shahid and his motives, which, by the way, would never happen. 2 officers are not going to go and try to find some random reporter to gather intelligence. That is not your job. As Shahid embarks on his plan to violently derail regional treaty talks, the Special Operations Forces make their move. Goddamn right they do. So let's get into it. Let's talk about the moves that they make. So I'm going to roll over here to the movie itself. And what I'll do is I'll give you some time codes to look at. And the first one is actually 56 total seconds into the movie. And it actually gives me a chance to talk about and educate a little bit about the SEAL teams and where the SEAL community comes from. And it reads, or the slide you'll see at the 56-second mark, is a black background, and at the very top there's a gold trident, which is actually the logo is right here on my awesome BRCC coffee mug. That is the pin that you wear on your uniform, or a patch if it's sewn on over your left breast pocket. Once you receive that, that is when you actually become a SEAL. Your designator is changed inside of the military computer system. If you are enlisted, it will be 5326, and if you're an officer, it's likely going to be an 1130. I believe there are some variations on the officer coding, but I know for a fact 1130 is a special operations officer. So you get your trident, not when you graduate BUDS. That's a huge misconception in and of itself. BUDS is a 6-month selection process. If you make it through, you're not a SEAL. You have made it through basic SEAL training. You're probably going to have another 18 to 24 months ahead of you. The training now is different than the training that I went through. The training that I went through afterwards was conducted at the team level. Now it's conducted at a level where both East and West Coast SEALs, or people who will become SEALs, train in one location. They get all of their jump training. They get their cold weather training. They get their small unit tactics training all in the same place. And then they also receive their trident together. And then they diverge and go to their East or West Coast teams. So that is very different than the program that I went through, and I actually think it's better because it's what you get is a product of individuals that have largely the same skill set regardless of which coast you go to. So that's the designator or the pin in and of itself. But this slide talks about where the SEAL teams actually came from. And it reads, in 1962, President Kennedy, believing that the wars of the future would be low-intensity conflicts such as guerrilla wars and acts of terrorism, created an elite special forces unit to meet the enemy on his own turf. Experts in sea, air, land operations. They are known as Navy SEALs. Where does the term SEAL come from? Sea, air, land. It's an acronym. The 3 environments that we're supposed to be able to operate and fight in. Not really sure how you fight underwater. Whipping a knife out underwater would be a terrible idea. In the air, I've never been in a fight in the air. I've attempted a kung fu fight in the air, but I couldn't even get close to anybody, close enough to fight, because it's ridiculously hard to do. And then, of course, the land, which is where I would say the SEAL community makes or is known, and that's the bread and butter of their work. Now, in 1962, and it was actually in January of 1962, President Kennedy commissioned SEAL Team 1 and SEAL Team 2. But it's not like he just snapped his fingers and then all of a sudden there were SEAL teams. Well, actually, that's inaccurate. that almost is about what happened. He wrote into doctrine basically that SEAL Team 1 and SEAL Team 2 were created, but the people who populated those SEAL teams, they didn't appear overnight. So they came from a community known as the UDT, or Underwater Demolition Teams, and they got their start in the 40s, in 1942 specifically. And if you're a fan of history, which hopefully most people are, because it helps us avoid the mistakes, well, in theory, it should help us avoid the mistakes in the future. In the 40s, the United States was involved with World War II, which was pretty heavy in certain areas with amphibious invasions. And in the early 40s, by doctrine, naval personnel were not involved with warfare on land. If you went past the high water mark, which is, if you think of a beach, the tide goes up and down, and there's a low tide every day, and there's a high tide every day. And if you were to put a pin in the sand at the highest point of the highest tide of the day, that's the high water line. And by doctrine, that is where the domain of the Navy ended. And beyond that was the Army and the Marines. So if you were going to get dropped off by a landing craft, which is going to be driven by naval personnel, when you hit the beach and you ran towards the sound of the guns in the manner that only the Army and the Marine Corps are capable of doing so, you went past the high water line, and that was totally your domain. But if you think about it, in those environments where you're landing where you're approaching a beach in a landing craft and you're under fire, you're probably getting rocketed, you're probably getting mortared, you're probably getting shot at by plunging machine gun fire. That environment sucks. And if you're just riding in that boat, that's not an awesome environment to be in. And it's probably not a great environment to be in if you're driving the boat either. So there were multiple instances where, in an attempt to reach the beach, a landing craft would encounter a coral reef. And the bottom of the boat would contact, or for whatever reason, the driver would think that they had found the beachhead. They would lower the ramp. The Army and Marine Corps soldiers would drive forward. And think about this too. The gear back then in the 40s was obviously what it was. Probably not positively buoyant. At best, maybe neutral, but more than likely it was negatively buoyant. They charged forward towards the sound of the guns. They encountered water that was over their head, and quite a few times they drowned. So the Navy realized they needed a solution for that. And what they really needed was a hydrographic reconnaissance, meaning from the landing point out to about 1,000 yards, they needed to know how deep the water was. They needed to know where the channels were. They needed to identify obstacles. And more than likely, they needed to blow those obstacles, everything up to and including the high water line. And what they did was create an element called the UDT, Underwater Demolition Teams. And from the 40s into the 60s, largely that's what they specialized in. They did some other stuff, but in the 60s, President Kennedy turned on the light switch for the SEAL teams, SEAL Team 1 on the West Coast, SEAL Team 2 on the East Coast. And the cool thing is they didn't have to really recreate the training. They actually took the training that they used for the UDT teams, and that has been the training for the SEAL community since its inception. And they started populating the SEAL teams with members from the UDT, and eventually the SEAL teams absorbed the UDT teams, and the UDT teams went away. So the cool thing is, though, it has that same origin. That's where Navy Special Operations actually begins, well back in the 40s. Then here we have in the 60s, and obviously it's continued to evolve and advance beyond that as technology has, and the battlefields have changed in that time period. Now, no more history lesson, because I suspect people are probably not tuning into this particular episode because they want a history lesson. They want to know my thoughts on the movie Navy SEALs. So let's dive in to the old movie Navy SEALs. And like I said, I have some scenes here that we're going to play and talk about them. We'll talk about them kind of real time as they play out. I'll pause and tell you what I'm seeing and a little bit of the difference between reality and fiction. The first one here is going to occur just after the 4-minute mark. It fades in from black, and what we see is a young SEAL passed out, face down on the beach. So let's let this thing play out. Okay. So, like I said, it fades in from black. We have a young SEAL face down on the beach. The water's washing over the top of him. He is awoken by the waves, brings himself to his hands and knees with the classic line of, "Where the fuck am I?" And now this is Charlie Sheen, so I doubt he had to do much particular acting in this scene. He could well have just been, they could have just found him one morning on the beach, given how much we know now he likes to party, and filmed this thing live. But as far as accuracy goes, let's see what we have here. We have a young SEAL. He's blackout drunk. He wakes up. He doesn't know where he is. He has a random high-heel silver stiletto pump shoe inside of his waistline and stumbles towards a random city or set of houses. From a technical perspective, I'm going to say they nailed it here. This is actually more than likely the most accurate scene of the movie. So bravo to whoever did the research for this particular portion. You guys nailed it. Now, let's move on to something a touch more tactical, and this is going to happen at the 10-minute mark. So as the movie goes on, if you've watched this movie, which you all should, one of the first things that happens is a helicopter gets shot down, and 3 people from the crew are taken hostage, so they're going to need to get rescued, which is where the SEAL team is now going to enter the picture again. So they are going to do a dynamic entry and rescue of this helicopter crew. So let's just let this thing play out. Okay, I'm going to play just a touch more. All right, and I'm going to stop it there, and I'll actually put a screen grab up of the screen or the scene that I have. So, oh man, there's a lot to unpack right here. What we have is a dynamic, I would call this a hostage rescue situation because, well, that's what it is. And we have our team of SEALs. What am I counting? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I think 7 of them. They come through doors and they all come through a skylight. So let's talk about the skylight first. An individual basically jumps through a skylight. He's doing a rappel where with his left, so the rappel harness and the friction device are now on his back. He's controlling the descent with his left hand while shooting one-handed MP5 SD full auto as he's falling. And if you watch the movie, what you'll realize is that the rounds start coming through the guy's back long before the shots are taken. And when the scene actually shows the guy falling through the skylight, his gun's not even pointing at the guy. Now, even though that's comical, think about this from an actual real perspective. Why would you need to jump through the skylight when you could just shoot through the skylight? If you want to actually aim accurately, shoulder your weapon, aim it, you can go through the glass. The first round might be inaccurate. But since these cockbags are all shooting full auto, and let's talk about that for a second, I have a theory on individuals who use full auto, and I believe that there are 2 types. There are actors, which of course are these individuals. And then there are assholes, right? Those are the only 2 types of people that use full auto. Why do I say assholes use full auto? Because you can't hit anything, especially if it's at a distance of any measurable distance. You can hit something, but you're not going to be accurate at best. If I put a human-sized silhouette at 100 yards and I give somebody an M4 or even an MP5 SD in this case, and your only option that I give you is to depress the trigger until the magazine is empty, and you have a 30-round magazine, my money is on the fact that you will hit 5 or less inside of the silhouette. For most people, 10 or less would be an exceptionally good job. So these guys are all shooting full auto. They all have MP5 SDs, which actually is an awesome gun to shoot. The problem with it is it's a 9mm round. So it is a pistol caliber round, and every one of these guys that they shot with these MP5s went flying backwards, which is not the case. It doesn't have the kinetic energy or the ability to do so. So we have a group of guys who are coming through online. I'm counting 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 guys online. And from soup to nuts, these guys are a mess. They got like one guy's got a canvas sack thrown over his bag or over his back, whipping around on his side. They all have their radios on their back, which means they can't change the channel. The shooting stance, these guys are so bladed they could cut a birthday cake right now. And one guy's got his pistol out, and I don't understand why he has his pistol out. So they're shuffling forward, they're shooting, people are flying backwards. The entry itself and getting everybody online, that's not that bad of a tactic. I mean, that would work. No need to put somebody through the skylight, like I said. The reaction to the bullets is a little bit ridiculous, and let's just play forward just a touch more. Oh yeah, it's clear. Now, I'd stopped it again at 10 minutes and 40 seconds. My man here got his MP5 underneath his left arm and what looks to be a nickel-plated Beretta at full arm extension. Now, this is actually legit, or it would be legit, if he had a flashlight on his MP5. So I actually trained with MP5s when I first got in. They're a blast to shoot because it's a small round, so you can shoot them really accurately. Now, these guys all have iron sights on their gun, which is pretty accurate as well, given the fact that night vision and holographic optics weren't really that cutting edge. Actually, the technology was beyond, in the 90s, it was beyond what these guys would have had access to. So what you used to have was a flashlight underneath the barrel of the MP5, and it was integrated into your foregrip, and you would have a pressure pad that you would basically press or squeeze with your index, middle, ring, and pinky, and obviously your thumb would be on the other side. So if you came into a dark room, you had the ability to white light to figure out what was going on. You could identify threats and engage them. And if your primary weapon went dry or you had a malfunction, you had the ability to kind of push it forward and swing it underneath your left armpit. And you could maintain that pressure so you could still see what was going on. Then you could transition to your pistol and engage if you needed to, using that light to illuminate everything. So the problem with this is that this guy has got no light on his flashlight. So there's no reason for him to put it under his left arm unless he's trying to assume the most unstable shooting position humanly possible, which is what he's got going on right now. So what he needs to do is shit can that MP5 with both hands, pull his pistol out, and then engage with the pistol, then fix the malfunction or whatever's wrong with his MP5, get it back up and running, back up online, and away he goes. So this is a perfect example of probably somebody in Hollywood seeing a transition like that on the range and wanting to integrate it into a movie, but where they integrated it and how they did it, it makes absolutely no sense. So let's let the raid continue to play itself out. Nice. More full auto. Real clear. Everybody pulls off their balaclava. And, of course, they have telemarketer headsets. They just called target secure. That's accurate. The grenades on the shoulders, not really accurate. Not a good idea. Goddamn right they are. SEAL team, here to get you out. They're doing what we called SSE, or Site-Sensitive Exploitation. They're going back and documenting, gathering intelligence. Corpsman's working on an injured personnel. And let's talk about this. 11 minutes, 31 seconds. What we have is the AOIC, who is kind of rolling around looking for a job, and he decides to walk up and check to see if the door is locked. Now, he has some shotgun shells on his right shoulder, basically right where his gun would come into his shoulder if he had a buttstock. But these guys are actually sling shooting their MP5s, which is a legitimate tactic because it's easy to handle, and you can do this with MP7s as well. Because the weapon is small and easy to handle, if you have a sling that goes behind your neck and underneath one shoulder, if you push it out hard enough, it basically creates a rigid shooting position. And if you practice it enough times, you get used to the eye relief, so you can align your rear and your front sight. And you can shoot really accurately without having a buttstock in your shoulder. So him having the shotgun rounds there is not that big of a deal. Over his left shoulder, he has a shotgun, which is designed, or in this particular use, would be for breaching doors. And what he's doing right now is he's walking up to a door, and he's going to assess whether or not it's locked. Now, you could kick it in, and if you're from the Pacific West school of thought, you would use your toe and kick it like a little bitch, which it would not open. Or you could mule kick it, which is how you're actually going to get the door open. And from there, you could escalate. You could go mechanical tools, a hoolie or a sledge. You could go a shotgun, or you could go explosive. So my man here, the AOIC, has a shotgun and apparently a set of UFC gloves on as well. And what he's doing is he's rolling up to a door and he's checking to make sure that it's locked or unlocked. And the way he's doing it is completely screwed up. So if you go to this screen, it's 11:31 into it, and I'll actually put a screenshot up of this. He's pushing up really high on the door, on the doorknob side of the door. He's pushing in to see if the door opens. Now, there's obviously going to be a locking mechanism on the door somewhere, and when it comes to breaching doors, the first thing you have to do is determine which direction it opens. And if you don't know how to do that, it's actually really easy. So look at any door. If you're listening to this inside of an office complex, or if you're in your house, look at any door, and if you can see the hinges, there's usually 3. Top one is going to be at about where your wristwatch would be. The bottom one will be the top of the boot. And the middle one would be, cutting the door basically in half. If you can see those, the door is going to open towards those hinges. So that'll be an outward opening door. If you're looking at a door and it's totally flush and you can't see the hinges, the door is going to open in. That's an inward opening door. Now, what you got to do, though, before you start deciding to breach, or you don't have to, but a really good idea to do before you start starting to breach, is to actually check the door to make sure it's open. So if it has a locking mechanism, you go up to it and you turn it to see if you can open it. And most of the time, they're going to open, especially inside of a structure, because most people don't lock doors inside of structures. Now, these guys are inside of a structure. What this guy's doing right here is just kind of pushing on the outside of the door on the doorknob size. It doesn't look like there's a doorknob. So he's going to find out that it is actually locked, and let's see what he does from there. Oh, yeah. He's pulling the shotgun out of the scabbard. Okay, so he pulls the shotgun out of the scabbard. He decides he's going to shotgun breach it. Pulls out a pump-action shotgun. Everything's going well up to this point, and then he totally fucks it up. So he decides to shoot at the hinges from about 3 feet away, which is absolutely not how this works. You need to have the barrel of the shotgun probably 1 inch to 2 inches, a little bit of offset away from the door, so all of the energy from the round you're going to shoot into it actually goes into the door. I'd suspect that the rounds that he has are buckshot, given that they're red, or just the normal appearance of a shotgun round. The Hatton rounds, the specifically breaching for shotgun, they're of a different color. These could be slugs, but either way, even if they were a slug, you wouldn't shoot at it from 3 feet away, because now that I actually paused this, you can tell his eyes are closed and he's wildly shooting. So you would attack the hinges if it's an inward opening door. You would attack the hinges or the doorknob or the combination of, and then you're going to kick the thing in and make entry. So I don't know why they chose to go down this route, but what he's doing is going to be at best wildly ineffective. And everybody out in the courtyard now, all the bad guys, they of course heard all that because they went from suppressed weapons to a pump-action shotgun, which is not suppressed. And then they just made entry, and instead of opening the door, apparently his shotgun was so powerful that they just ran directly through the middle of it, which is awesome. I wish that would be the case. I've tried to run through a door before, and what happened was my barrel hit the door, then my front side came back up and hit me directly in the face, and I fell backwards. So I don't know. I didn't have that experience. And then they find an unknown. And I'll end this scene by saying that, they found an unknown in the room, and what also happened is his shotgun mysteriously disappeared. So the AOIC here is definitely going to get charged with a case of beer. He's got gear adrift on target. Apparently he just hucked that pump-action shotgun, and God knows where it is because it's no longer with him, and it actually doesn't show up for the rest of the sequence until they make it to the helicopter. So the bad guys just got themselves a pretty awesome pump-action shotgun. Now, let's move forward here just a little bit. So they rescue the hostages. They make their way out. They're going to leave. They're trying to get to the helicopter. And then they start getting shot at. And they bring in my favorite character of all time in any movie. Here we go. So they're in a gunfight. They're pinned down. They're talking to the sniper. God. My man's up there on a crane, just working at 50 cal. All right. At 1356, God's looking for two people who are behind concrete walls. And every time I've seen this scene, there was something about it that didn't seem to be correct. So you're talking to a sniper who is on the other side of a wall. And what he's trying to do is he's trying to identify two people who, and I'm looking at this, it's got to be a 6 to 8 inch thick concrete wall. And what it looks like is there's two little sections of concrete. Now, the guys here he is looking for are on the other side of the concrete. So they are obscured from his starlight vision, which I've never looked through one of those scopes. I'm actually curious how bad it would actually be. But what's weird about this is that there are bullets impacting the side of the wall that he can see, which doesn't make any sense to me because everybody that he is trying to help and everybody that he is looking for are on the other side of the concrete. And I finally realized that there's no reason ever that somebody would be shooting at this side of the concrete. So I don't know why they added this, unless they were trying to make it dramatic, because all the shooting is happening on the other side of the wall. Switching to thermal. And we find ourselves at the Predator vision. And now, I've looked through plenty of thermals, but they were modern day thermals, and they are either black or white. You can do black hot or you can do white hot. I have never seen a thermal, one, that can see through 6 to 8 inches of concrete, and two, that has this color scheme. Because if you look at this, the body heat is red, and honestly, it looks like the movie Predator. And so they have the red body heat, and they're able to see through this concrete, which I wish thermal was that effective. You can see through trees, you can see, well, not through trees, you can see through the foliage of trees, you can see through, light foliage, but I have never encountered a device that allows you to see through mud walls, brick, or concrete like this. So it's just, I wish it was this good. This is 100% added for Hollywood effect. Let's let God work. Nice. All right, so he takes two shots, and his 50 cal round is leaving. It's penetrating a concrete wall and leaving. Just looking at that, that's got to be a 2.5 foot hole. So, I wish it was that awesome. I wish you could see through concrete. And looking at this from the side, that is at least 8 inches of concrete. And now it actually even looks like a foot and it shows rebar in there too. So reinforced concrete pillars. I wish it could go through that. Oh man, I remember watching this when I was a kid, thinking that was going to be me one day up on a crane, and it never was. And plus, the bullets couldn't do it anyway. And if I had a thermal, I wouldn't have been able to see him. So the whole thing is kind of made up, but it is what it is. All right, they're not moving. You're clear. So they move out. As opposed to completely dissecting the rest of the scene, they eventually split up. The AOIC finds some stingers, so he decides to throw some grenades at the stinger missiles, which it's not how that necessarily works. They don't go off, surprisingly enough. They all make it back to the helicopter. Everybody gets out okay. They fly away. The hostages have been rescued. And then the missiles become probably the key point of the movie, their desire to chase after the missiles. So we're going to jump forward here a little bit. I was going to do, in the plot of the movie, the next time they find the missiles, they're on not a cruise ship, they're on a container ship. And I was originally going to film this episode of Tactical Assholes with the one and only John Barklow, which most people know and love from Sitka, the amazing camo company. But he was also a Navy diver for 20 plus years. And when they find the missiles on the boat, they locked out of a submarine. And I was curious as to the accuracy of the procedures that they followed. And since I was never an SDV guy or a diver, I was going to rely upon his knowledge. So we're going to skip that because I am not the expert when it comes to underwater operations, specifically from a submarine. Fortunately, though, the missiles weren't there. It was a ruse. And they find the missiles, or what they end up doing as the plot continues, this is where they go and talk to the reporter, which would never happen. You're never going to have the two officers go out and just start interfacing with a celebrity or personality in the media world, sharing intelligence, trying to locate an individual that they could go in, insert, and then do basically a body snatch on, which is what they decide to do. They find an individual that might know where the missiles are, and they're going to jump in and sneak into his house, grab him, and then take him out of there, which I'm not going to say that's necessarily far-fetched. How they got the information is far-fetched, but if you're looking for a source or you have a source and you want to go after him, there's no reason you couldn't choose to do that. So they pick my favorite insertion method that often talked about, almost never seen military freefall insertion. And they're going to choose to go with the halo jump, which stands for high altitude, low opening. I hit the wrong button. Charlie Sheen is talking. What I'm trying to do here is find the... Actually, there we go. All right. So if you jump to 56 minutes, 53 seconds, and I'll put a screen grab of this up here. They are walking out to the aircraft, and I love it. They have what we would call the kitchen sink. They have a MT-1X parachute system. They have a LAR-5 Draeger diving rig on their chest. They have their rucksacks in their left or right hand. They have an oxygen hose and mask that is just dangling out of the front of their body, and they're walking towards the airplane, getting ready to jump from 30,000 feet. Now, let's talk about jumping from 30,000 feet. For one, you're going to be breathing pure oxygen, specifically aviator-grade oxygen, and you breathe that because it has almost no moisture content, so you don't have to worry about anything freezing when you're at those cold temperatures. But that requires an oxygen bottle for your oxygen mask. I posted a picture of this early on the Tactical Assholes page. All of these guys have an oxygen mask. None of them have an oxygen bottle. So if they could source all of this gear, because the Draeger has an oxygen bottle, but it's not dual use. That's specifically for the diving rig. So these guys have a lot of accurate gear on them. It wouldn't have been that hard, I would assume, to get an oxygen bottle to throw on there. So they have these great masks and no ability whatsoever to actually breathe oxygen, but they also skipped the pre-breathe anyway. If you're going to go to 30,000 feet, you're going to pre-breathe for at least an hour to purge your body from nitrogen. And then what you're going to do is slowly climb to altitude or decompress the aircraft. And the entire time, it's just going to be a mask shoved onto your face. It's uncomfortable. It's probably going to give you a headache. But what you're trying to do is purge your body of nitrogen. And the big risk when you decompress at that altitude is low partial pressure of oxygen. There's the same amount of oxygen at altitude as there is at sea level, but it's just dispersed because the pressure is decreased. If you were to rapidly decompress at 30,000 feet, your time of usable consciousness would be, I'm going to say, 15 to 30 seconds, and that's probably high. Most people would be face down on the ramp, convulsing within 10 seconds, which is going to be a big problem because you're going to have to deal with that person. It probably is going to cancel your insertion, and that's why you spend so much time and effort making sure you do the pre-breathe and making sure that everything's correct. But these guys skipped all that, which, why would you do that? Because you can't capture any dialogue if somebody's mask is shoved onto their face. So here we go. They're walking out. Yeah, these guys are wearing legit gear. They got the Draeger hose over the back of their neck. Those are legit LAR-5 rigs. You know, when I posted the picture on Tactical Assholes, I was making fun of the fact that none of them had any guns. And now as they're walking to the airplane, you can see that they actually have MP5s slung on their left-hand side through their rig. And it's just I don't know, it makes me laugh. It's one of the most ridiculous things ever that you would take an MP5 into the type of settings that these guys are taking an MP5. It has the effective range of a pistol because it is a pistol caliber and a pistol cartridge. I don't know. It's they had access to ARs and M4s in this day. That would be the weapon of choice. Another thing to point out, as they're walking out to the aircraft, you can tell that their rucksacks have, at best, a pillow in them, which is actually really dangerous because the rucksacks are pretty big and they have surface area, and if they don't have any weight in them, they're going to move all over the place, and they're basically just going to own you. So the rucksacks are obviously fake, and if you look at the altimeters on their wrist, they're all dialed to a different altitude. It's awesome. So they have all the right gear. I don't know if they didn't hire a technical advisor, but they just don't know how to put it on or wear it appropriately. So now they're boarding the aircraft, and the commanding officer is about to have a chat with the OIC at the ramp of a running C-130, which if you were to scream at the top of your lungs, you might be able to hear every other word that somebody was saying, but you probably wouldn't be able to understand what that word is. You would know that they were making noises with their mouth, but it's really hard to understand what it is they were saying. So we'll let them have this conversation in normal tone of voice, and then we'll get to the jump itself. C-130 taking off. Thematic, scenic shots as it punches through the clouds.
2 hours in, 45 minutes at the peak.
They're chatting here a little bit. We're going to skip forward just a little bit because no reason to cover a bunch of this. Now, one thing I do have to cover, because this kills me. At the 58-56, this crew chief comes down, and they start talking about the altitude with which they're going to jump from, and this interaction between these two SEALs just absolutely drives me batshit crazy.
What's our altitude? What's our altitude? It's about 30,000. 6 miles up. That was crazy. That's right. Proud of it, baby.
All right. I don't know if that captured on the audio, but this crew chief comes down. One guy asks what the altitude is. The other guy says about 30,000, 6 miles up. You guys are crazy. And one of the SEALs is getting ready to jump, says, yeah, and proud of it, and walks over to his buddy who says to him, hoo-yah, which has got to be addressed because I hate this term. And I suspect that most SEALs hate this term. The term hoo-yah comes from SEAL training. It is the answer to every question that you are ever asked. Do you like pizza? Hoo-yah, instructor Stumpf. Do you understand me? Hoo-yah, instructor Stumpf. It can mean everything from yes to no to go fuck yourself. And most of the time, as you evolve through training, it becomes more of a pejorative than a positive. And there is absolutely no way that any SEAL who has made it through SEAL training is going to use that term post a training environment, because it's the only place where it actually has any meaning, and you end up hating saying it because you have to scream it so often and you yell it, and it's the answer to all of your questions. So the only time you would ever say it would be to make just a terrible, terrible joke. And the fact that this guy, and I've had this experience, I've worked a little bit with some productions in the SEAL area, and for whatever reason they love this term, and they wanted SEALs late in their career to be using it, and it's just a misunderstanding. It is inside of the SEAL community, it is a joke. And if I ever heard a guy using it like this, or if anybody listening to this ever hears a SEAL using the term hoo-yah like this, what I need you to do is immediately go up and punch them in the goddamn throat, because they're a total douche. It's not a term that's ever going to be used. If I heard somebody using that term, what it would kick off in my mind is the radar that they might be totally full of shit. So don't use that term. Don't ask people to use that term, and throat punch people who use it. So skipping ahead. We are now getting ready to exit the aircraft. They're going to give them the 6-minute warning, which is not actually when you put your mask on, even though that's what they all did in this movie. Why? Because you wouldn't have had a chance to purge the nitrogen from your system. People are going to have some serious issues. Like I said, they skipped the pre-breathing process, but what it did is it allows them to talk back and forth, and you can capture some character and plot development. All right, they're getting all jocked up. I'll let this play out. Oh, now they're depressurizing. Cool. Ramps coming down. Sunrise or sunset. And I have to pause this here. Oh, my God. All right, Charlie Sheen's face at 1 hour and 4 seconds. The ramp's coming down. The sunset is in his face, and his oxygen mask is dangling off of his face, even though it's attached to his helmet. There is no seal whatsoever. If this was real life at 30,000 feet, this dude would be on his face in instants. So this mask needs to be jammed on your face, which I don't think, well, I don't know. Maybe Charlie Sheen has an issue with it because it's not a pile of cocaine, so he didn't want it to be just really up against his face. But if you take a second to look at this, I'll actually put a screen grab up at this as well. This man would be face down just because of the fact that his mask is so loose. And you know what happens after this is they start talking before they jump. And there's no way to communicate like that unless you have an earpiece in your helmet, which these guys don't have, attached to a radio, and you're pushing on your push to talk. None of that happens, but somehow they're having these conversations on the ramp. But let's let this jump play out. Guys, altimeter showing 28,000 feet. Jumpmaster spotting from the ramp, looking down at the ocean as if he would have any idea where they are. Totally nonsensical. This would be a GPS release, so there's no reason whatsoever to look out the damn side of the aircraft.
Jesus, Dave, who the fuck packed your chute? It doesn't look good. I wouldn't jump it if I were you.
So what just happened there is they were doing a pin check. And one guy lifted the reserve flap and looked at the reserve cable and the reserve pin. And you're basically just making sure it's seated but not shouldered. And there's absolutely no way to be able to tell whether or not the parachute is packed appropriately or not. So that comment of, I don't know who packed your chute, I wouldn't jump it if I were you. One, you were looking at his reserve. So, maybe close that up and look at the main pack tray. And two, you can't really tell how well it's been packed just by looking at the container. So shut your face and get out of the aircraft. Here we go.
One more thing. For God's sakes, be careful out there. I was careful, I'd be in the Coast Guard. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, go, go, go.
And they're off. As far as freefall skills, these guys are actually doing pretty good. They're linked up pretty good in the air. So they're all starting to deploy their parachute now. And the individual that got warned about their parachute is now having a malfunction. So they're calling it a streamer, which I'm not going to get into the weeds on the different types of parachute malfunctions. But the one thing I noticed going back and looking through this is that even though he has a malfunctioning parachute above his head, the majority of the shots that are showing him are showing his back. And you can see that his main pack tray and reserve pack tray are still closed, which means that the parachute that is above his head is obviously not a parachute that came from the system on his back. So in the movies or in skydiving in general, if you're going to do an intentional cutaway, you have to wear a third parachute system. So somehow they figured out a way, probably it was a belly-mounted parachute, to deploy this parachute, and then this individual is going to be able to cut it away and still have two in case his main parachute malfunctions, which is pretty common. But what I will say is, at least in modern movies, they do a much better job of hiding it. Because this container is gray, it's wildly obvious that he still has a complete parachute system. So he's going to chop this bad boy.
Oh, shit. Shit, Graham's got a streamer.
I love it. They're all talking about it.
Release! Release, Graham! Bail! 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 Get away, Graham!
They're all giving him guidance and feedback while he's dealing with a malfunction for far too long. And, yeah. Then, obviously, they figure out a way to drop probably a mannequin from a crane with a parachute that has no slider, and you can just tell it's not an actual real human being, which, whatever. This was made in the 90s, but it's still pretty damn obvious. They go into the water, and the last thing I noticed about this is, before as mentioned, they were all wearing LAR 5 draggers. When they hit the water, and this is where I needed Barklow, you son of a bitch. I don't know what rig they're jumping or what rig they're diving on now because I've never seen the canister in front. So they went from jumping a LAR 5 rig somehow after they left the aircraft, but before they hit the water, they were able to switch out their diving rigs, which is an impressive feat. I've never been able to do that, but they were able to do it. So I don't know what rig this is, but it's a pretty drastic switch, and if you know what you're looking for, it just basically just blasts out at you. Now let's go to the last scene that I'm going to talk about, because other than this scene, everything is repetitive. And this is at the hour and 25-minute mark. Now, what happened between now and then is they were able to get the source that they were looking for. That AOIC, Charlie Sheen's character, though, got a little antsy in his pantsy. He couldn't stay in his security position, so he basically forced a firefight. Their chief got killed. So they do what we do. They went and got completely blackout drunk to celebrate his life. Which doesn't help you deal with the grief whatsoever, so that'll come back to haunt you later in your life. And then they get another shot at it. So they do a Zodiac insertion into Beirut. I need to get to the scene where they get ambushed. All right, so they're going to be getting ready to get ambushed here. Now, these guys, at least now, are bringing some pretty cool tools to the party. These guys have got AKs, and they met a source on the beach, which happened to be a kid. And I think that's probably... it's at least plausible. I mean, you never really know exactly what your source is going to be, and if it's a kid from the local area and they know what they're doing, then bring it. So these guys, again, are going after the Stinger missiles, so they're walking through town. Damn, that's dramatic music. Now, what we got here? We got AKs and we got telemarketer headsets. So that's a pretty classic pairing. Talking about how it's the other side of the moon. I need to get to the point where they start getting shot at because this is where this starts coming unwound. So they're crossing the street. People start taking pot shots at them. We got the OIC wearing a black and white checkered shamal. Charlie Sheen's wearing a red and white checkered one with woodland camis. It's a classic tactical asshole pairing. Also, what I just noticed is most of them are running around. They have collapsible buttstock AKs. Most of the buttstocks are collapsed. Now, an AK shoots completely differently than an MP5 SD when you talk about having no buttstock. If you shoot an AK at full arm extension, that thing is going to own you. You're not going to hit a goddamn thing. Totally different than an MP5. So, buttstocks into the shoulder, please, people, if you're going to go blasting with an AK. All right, they're making their way through the village, and it's about to get real. Yeah, fully collapsed buttstock on Sheen's AK. So they're basically navigating their way through what looks like a regional conflict. They're trying to stay in a place where, they're not taking sides because they're trying to get to where the missiles are. So they're working their way through basically a burned out section, blown out section of town. Oh, and they're about to eat a freaking RPG-7. All right, so at least now people are rock and rolling. Their buttstocks are out. They're all shooting full auto, which is good, and I'm looking at their selector switches. They're actually all on full auto, which is nice. But I love the fact, so again, they have these telemarketer headsets in. I've never used that thing, but I'm assuming it's not waterproof. These guys are blasting with AKs, which are louder than shit, and they're just talking, and they're just, they'll shoot a bit and then talk, and shoot a bit and then talk. And you got the OIC running around having conversations with people, which defeats the purpose of having a radio. So if you have a device that allows you to talk from a distance, maybe use the device. So let's see how these guys do tactically. God's going to high ground. It's probably a good move, except for the fact you'd never go by yourself. All right. In the interest of saving time and not turning this into a 2-hour affair, I think we can pretty much finish it up right there. So the OIC and AOIC, they're actually doing okay when it comes to tactics, right? They're using a very basic tactic called cover and move, where somebody shoots while the other person is moving. What I can say is that right about now, we're at, 200 rounds fired with 0 magazine changes. Like I said, the infinity magazine of the Hollywood world. They're talking, they're yelling, they're trying to fight their way through this instead of what I would say probably the better move would be to bound backwards and make a lateral shift to get away from it. They're going to punch right through. God, the sniper, has now gone like 100 yards on his own. He's off doing a solo mission, clearing structures, looking for high ground, which isn't necessarily impossible, but the likelihood of you being off by yourself like that, almost 0, especially in an environment like this, where your maneuver, the element you came from is also going to maneuver while you're maneuvering. It's like the worst case scenario where nobody knows where anybody else is, so you got to be very careful with that. And the reason I think we can end it here is because everything that happens after this in the movie is a repeat of what has already happened. So they eventually find the building. They use the thermal scope again to see through the walls to locate where people are. I already covered that. They get into a firefight, and they use the 50 cal again, and it's punching holes through concrete. I already covered that. The OIC gets hurt. They were going to leave him, but they end up blowing up the building. They maneuver through town, and it's all the same stuff. So the magazines never end. They never really reload. They do too much damage. They make their way to the water. Of course, at the end of the day, the heroes are successful because it's a movie. Right? And these, for whatever reason, these 6 guys were able to gallivant around the world, never calling on another force, never calling on another unit to come and help them. It was just really this particular SEAL team, which is the exact opposite of what it would actually be like. This movie, in its hour and 53 minutes, covers about a 40-year career if you are lucky, at least in this day and age, the 90s where this was set. If you as an individual were part of a unit that had this much combat experience, you were definitely the cock of the walk because pretty much nothing was happening. But that's it from a tactical perspective. We could go deeper and deeper and deeper, but I think that would be too much. The things that just pop out to me are the things that always pop out to me would be the way that they handle the weapons, the way that the weapons never go dry, the ridiculous outfits that they're wearing, the way that they have some of the appropriate gear but not all the pieces that would make it work, and just the fact that they are constantly combining tactical elements with entertainment elements, which is the point of the movie in and of itself. But it becomes difficult to watch from a perspective of knowing what's actually happening. So that is it for Volume 1 of Tactical Assholes, covering the movie Navy SEALs. So that is it for Tactical Assholes Volume 1, covering the movie Navy SEALs. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope I didn't go too deep, and I hope I left at least a little bit to the imagination so you can watch this movie and suspend disbelief just a little bit. If you have suggestions for a movie you want me to take a look at, send it to me. We're going to do a bunch of stuff in the future. I'm going to try to do, like I said, one of these a month. I'm going to do it with panels. I'm going to do it with every genre possible. And we'll try to keep to the unique points as opposed to repeating the same stuff over and over again. So that is it for Volume 1, Tactical Assholes.